being alone. You know, there are quite a lot of word linguistic problems because in different languages the semantics is not precisely the same, the seemingly same words. So the English word loneliness has definitely negative connotation. Corresponding Russian word is more neutral, and there is a specific word like solitude that refers to deliberate condition of being alone, the chosen loneliness. So I hope that you would forgive me if I will use the words that probably sound somewhat different for your ear, but I will try to lay bare the connections, the differences, and the language details about this. And so the idea, my main message is that being alone is not only a diagnosis, is not only really a social problem, but it contains a number of important positive potentials, and it's an existential view that allows to disclose those positive potentials and to discover this positive side of being alone. So, you know, and everyone is writing about this since probably 1950s. David Reisman, The Lonely Crowd, his famous book. So loneliness is a common condition in America of all ages, specifically, especially for adolescents and elderly people. That's traditional view that it's usually if you try to Google to see the database, usually it's associated with some problems, sometimes clinical problems. It's a frustration of the inherent sociality of human beings. And the point is whether it's inevitably so and always so, and the answer to be short, the take-home message, no, it is not inevitably so. And at this point I could finish my talk, but I will give you some arguments to put it in somewhat more detail. Besides its commonly known negative side, it has its positive side that is not so evident, that is not so universal, but that becomes evident through the prism of existential analysis. So the three parts of this lecture will be first about the theoretical considerations, the second about something that I could get and we could learn from the new inventory that I constructed that refer to individual differences in attitudes to being alone. And the third, it's also about a new set of data about the experiences associated with loneliness and social conditions depending on attitudes to loneliness, and they will reveal, you will see how much it can be a matter of individual differences and our own attitudes and expectations. So the first part is the theory, two sides of being alone, the curse and the blessing. So the working definition of loneliness is the experience of non-involvement in relationships with other people. It does not mean that I must be absolutely isolated from them. You know, David Reisman in 1950s published the book Lonely Crowd, where he described this lonely condition of lonely person in a crowd, surrounded by people, but not involved with any relationships with them. In fact, we might just draw it as a two-dimensional space with the dimension of objective separateness and subjective separateness. When we have both objective and subjective separateness, we have the condition of loneliness. when we have the situation of lonely crowd, lack of objective, separated, but only subjective separateness. This is what is level of alienation. When we are neither objectively nor subjectively separated from others, its relatedness and solitude is when we are subjectively separated from others, but not objectively. We have the relationship at our disposal, and it's our choice not to get involved. And this experience, the experience of being alone, may come both in virtual isolation and in a company or in a crowd. In this case, so the view of loneliness as a symptom, as a negative condition, stems from quite a number of theoretical developments in psychology that point at being related to others, to fellow humans, as a basic, very important condition, a human condition, as a basic human need, beginning from Adler, who introduced the concept of social interest, Gemeinschaftsgefühl, as the basic motivation of being, of cooperation with one's fellow humans to solve common tasks. Erich Fromm, who described the need as the need for relatedness with others as one of basic existential needs. Joseph Newton, who also pointed at the need for contact as one of the principal ones. Roy Baumeister, who made a profound analysis of the need for relatedness in all its aspects. It's a seminal paper of Baumeister and Leary reviewing these issues, especially focused on this issue, how important is relatedness for human functioning. And EDC and Richard Ryan, who also listed the need for relatedness as one of the three basic human needs, basic in the sense that it's supported by data, that the frustration of those needs decreases and the satisfaction of those needs increases our well-being, or the need for relatedness, one of the three definitely basic human needs. So loneliness and the frustration of this very important need, it's understandable that it is no good. There are data that loneliness is related to many somatic and mental symptoms, immune, cardiovascular, self-regulation impairment, and so on. There are a number of reviews, there are a number of publications on this, and recent surveys say that over 30% of adults and still more young and seniors experience loneliness on a regular basis. So this is no good. Rollo May, in his famous book on Man's Search for Himself, explained this. He stated that the experience of isolation is one of the characteristic features of the masses of that time, along with feeling of emptiness. And his explanation was that we have a need to be protected. The pressure of social acceptance labels a lonely person a loser. So the key problem is not that we feel lonely, but the key problem is that the society says that it's not okay to be lonely. This is the pressure, it's not okay. And what followed was a profound fear of being alone that was stronger than in previous ages. And in an issue, it's an amazing thing. In 2012, there was a special issue of the journal Personality dedicated to an important date in this field, to the publication, the 50 years of publication of Clark Mustaka's book on loneliness, and this was a special issue on loneliness, but the irony is that in this issue, all the papers on this issue had nothing to do with Mustaka's existential ideas and deep analysis and positive and the side of loneliness as well. All of the papers in that issue were about loneliness as a negative condition, as a symptom, and essentially by the spirit they had nothing to do with Mustakas views, though formally devoted, dedicated to just to this take. And that's some summary from the introduction to that issue by Emma Rocketschlon, and this summary says that first, loneliness is a universal phenomenon that is fundamental to being human. Second, although shared by all of us periodically, loneliness is in essence a subjective experience that's influenced by personal situation or variables, and it's a complex and multifaceted experience, but it's always very painful, severely distressing, and individualistic. Is it always so? And here we find the situation in a sense similar to the situation with trauma, traumatic, post-traumatic disorder. In case of severe trauma, we have rather universal, painful experiences that grow into post-traumatic stress disorder. Essentially, everyone who was in traumatized condition, but in some, there is also a paradoxical phenomena of traumatic growth, post-traumatic growth, improvement, not only the negative but also positive conditions. They are not in everyone, but they are parallel in a sense to the negative conditions of trauma, but also besides the negative conditions, there are some important positive outcomes, not in everyone, but they are quite visible. So now we have some data, some evidences that allow us to be more optimistic. A very interesting book by Harold Kleinenberg, Going Solo, 2012. It says that increasing numbers of people stay alone without apparently suffering from this. 1 in 7 United States adults, some 28% of households live alone, and in Sweden it's 47%, and most of them do not strive to change their status. They feel okay. They feel it's all right with it, many of them. And the regular trend of the last couple of decades associated with increasing benefits from going solo and the decreasing problems that cannot be solved. So social welfare just make it not so problematic to survive for a lonely person, unlike the previous centuries. And so now more and more people can afford to be single. Staying alone doesn't necessarily cause alienation, enemy, and unhappiness. It brings multiple new possibilities that may enrich life. It's not a demographic fact of being single, but some qualitative peculiarities of the experience of loneliness that can be psychologically harmful. So the point is how we feel about it, how we treat it. And there are some evidences in more focused psychological studies that show that the feeling of loneliness is not always harmful. Baumeister and Leary in his review say that they've pointed some data that show that the feeling of loneliness cannot be predicted by the number of social contacts rather than refers to a special quality of relationships, and this is a malleable thing. Multiple evidences support the idea that loneliness triggers reaffiliation material that plays an important role in human evolution. Mortality risk factors provided empirical evidences that subjective experience of loneliness is as well predictive of negative outcomes as objective isolation. So if we change our view on it, if we change our attitude, then we may may improve our condition. And in history, there are a lot of evidences about the positive loneliness, solitude, the positive condition of being alone. And it was the characteristic of distinguished writers, philosophers, saints, and psychologists. They valued being alone. So the clergy, people who are involved in some inner work, and in psychology, probably the first author who paid attention to this was Carl Jung in his famous paper on the development of personality. He noted that loneliness is a price for personality development. The personality development is a rather special trajectory of development. Not everyone goes this way of development along with one's own law, and the inevitable price for this is loneliness, but it's an affordable price because what you get is very, very important thing. So it's an affordable price. Maslow pointed in his description of self-actualizing people that they had a different attitude to loneliness than others. So they praise loneliness. It's okay for them to be lonely. And it's a specific individual. It's a resource of communication and autonomy support. Winnicott has a special paper on this issue also, the capacity to be alone is treated as an important dimension of emotional maturity. Deliberate choice of loneliness versus communication. Yalom described as an existential challenge. So it suggests that along with personality maturation and development, more positive sides of lonely state become visible. And so it becomes a matter of individual differences, so not necessarily a disease. Clark Mustaka's progress, some of you, I think, knew him personally. I haven't known him personally. Well, Stanley, you must have known him personally. Well, he offered in his books, two small books, Loneliness and Love, quite an extended existential theory of lonely state. Loneliness is as much organic to human existence as the blood is to the heart. He wrote that he made some very thin distinction between morbid loneliness, anxiety, and existential loneliness. Existential loneliness makes a person more humane, holistic, and sensitive, rather than isolating them from the world. In existential loneliness, man is fully aware of himself as an isolated and solitary individual, while in loneliness, anxiety, man is separated from himself. And being alone, another distinction, being alone and being lonely. Loneliness is one of a number of ways of being alone. To say I feel lonely is a quality to being alone, a unique isolated state that is unlike any other way of being alone. To be lonely means to experience the agony of living, of being, of dying as an isolated individual, or to know the beauty and joy and wonder of being alive in solitude. It's up to us, it's optional. Being alone is usually a between state, a bridge to the past or the future, while being lonely is always an immediate here and now engagement with life at the extremes. So that to be alone means to be alone with oneself. But to be lonely means to live intensely in the moment by creating a new self. So you see there are very thin distinctions. And he continued still another distinction. Existential loneliness is subdivided into the loneliness of solitude and peaceful harmonic state of facing the ultimate mystery of life, and the loneliness of a broken life, a life-changing painful crisis. It's not easy, it takes courage to face one's existential loneliness, but it repays its price. Why? The benefits of the solitude is a return to one's own self, when the world has grown cold and meaningless, when life has become filled with people and too much of response with others. Solitude is as much an intrinsic desire in man as his gregariousness. Hermits, social thinkers, independent spirits, recluses, although often stigmatized in the modern world, are the expressions of man's dialogue with himself. I emphasized the words dialogue with himself. Italics added, because it's the key idea of explanatory model that I'm proposing here. And finally, Mustakas said that in loneliness, man seeks the fulfillment of his inner nature. He maps new meanings and perceives new patterns for old ways and habits. Along the life of man passes before him. His philosophy, the meanings he attaches to his work and his relations, each significant aspect of his being comes into view as new values are formed. As man resolves to bring human significance, to bring life to each new day, to each piece of work, to each creation. So, in short, solitude is something that facilitates our inner work, the processes, the dynamics of our inner world, and being socializing with others is something that prevents us from being deeply involved in our own inner world, in our own inner life. It's neither good nor bad, but it has some benefits. So the key word that I use here in this context is auto-communication, communication with oneself. So it depends on whether we are a good enough partner for ourselves, whether we enjoy communicating to ourselves or we are afraid of ourselves, what we see in a mirror. Are we pleased with what we see in a mirror? Or we are scared with what we see in the mirror, we despise what we see in the mirror. In the second case, we have no interest, no motivation in auto-communication. I am a boring partner for myself. Or sometimes I can be a very interesting partner for myself in my inner dialogues. I refer to the ideas of Mikhail Bakhtin, the famous ideas of the polyphony multivoidedness of human consciousness and inner dialogue between different voices in us, which serves as an important resource of development. Very important point is that this inner dialogue, this auto-communication is closely related with self-reflection, and it is a psychological basis. Solitude thus appears as an important existential resource that became salient only as a relatively advanced developmental stage. It's one of the fundamental conditions of personality development, especially in the framework of existential psychology. It's especially favorable for the relationships with oneself. And I found a wonderful quotation in one of the novels of Nobel Prize winner José Saramago, Portuguese writer, one of the most interesting writers of our day. Loneliness is not living alone. Loneliness is an inability to keep someone or something within us company. It's not a tree that stands alone in the middle of a plain.